I'm going to go against the grain here and say that while it was soft, it was a foul. It was a soft foul. Stewart was absolutely allowed to travel. I think you can make the argument, and other people have, that you can't make that call, right? You have to let the play happen through contact, especially when it had been a lot of contact throughout the game. But by the letter of the law, that was a foul. Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's edition of The Late Sub. We are recording on Monday, October 21st, and we are about to go long on the WNBA Finals. We have a new first-time champion, a lot of big-picture things to talk about. A lot of things happened in this game that were very, very interesting. There were some hurt feelings. There were some tears. There's a whole lot of hometown pride in New York, and we're going to get into all of it right now. Okay, it is Monday after a huge sports weekend. You know we got to talk about it. We all woke up this morning probably thinking to ourselves, what happened last night? It's kind of like waking up after the party. You're texting friends. You're saying, was that weird? Was it normal? How are we feeling? The WNBA finals are over. It went to game 5. Winner take all. Game 5 in Brooklyn Sunday night. The New York Liberty, in their 6th appearance in the WNBA Finals, finally get it done for the first time ever in a thrilling 67-62 overtime winner take all. The highs were high, the lows were low. The discourse is humming today because it was a controversial game. We're going to talk through kind of what set the scene. We're going to talk through some of the points for the Liberty, some of the points for the Lynx, what I thought about what I saw. And it's a little bit of a mixture of sort of initial reactions from last night and also this morning, kind of reviewing everything in the light of day. Sometimes when you wake up, you have a little bit of a steadier head. You're not in the heat of the moment. You think, okay, here are some things that I missed. Here are some differences that I didn't notice. But maybe to start with the big picture, this championship for the Liberty, I think it kind of feels like that happy ending that everyone was sort of looking for this season for them after falling short in 2023. I think also just there's been this emphasis starting maybe the last college season, but going into this WNBA season is I do actually think with all of these new fans coming in to watch the WNBA, with these new stars coming into the WNBA, I think that everyone within the league or in the media has been very mindful of trying to reflect the deep histories of these teams, talk about the past. I mean, there was Teresa Weatherspoon, who she was in the spotlight as the head coach of Chicago, but people were talking about her history with the Liberty. You have someone like Becky Hammon, who is in the spotlight as the head coach of the Aces, but people talk about her time with the Liberty. You've got Rebecca Lobo, who is one of the premier broadcasters for ESPN. She talks about her time with the Liberty. It does feel like the league actually did a nice job, and the fans and the media and people who have a familiarity with this background talking about what this means for one of the original organizations in the WNBA to finally get this done. It was a finals series worthy of this many eyeballs, worthy of people talking about it more. I would say, like, I never want to say than ever, because there were some fabulous numbers at the end of the 90s, beginning of the 2000s, but maybe in this modern era of the WNBA, everyone was watching on Sunday night. Everyone was watching on Friday night. Minnesota, they had to come back. They were down 2-1. The question of whether or not the Liberty could wrap it up in 4 or if it was going to go to 5. Minnesota comes back. It's another really, really tight game. Comes down to the wire. Minnesota does get that game at home. They send it all the way to game 5. You're thinking to yourself, oh my gosh, this is absolutely the series that this season deserves. We're seeing blow for blow blockbuster stuff from some of the premier superstars of this league, and also some of just the veterans, showing the quality of these players that maybe you weren't familiar with when you came into the season if you were a new fan. The hype around this game was immense, and it was deserved, and this was tense, and I think nobody really knew exactly what was going to happen. And what happened, and I was talking about this before I hopped on. So it was a little bit of a monkey paw situation for me personally, because we go into game 5 and you see Minnesota give their all in game 4. It was incredibly compelling. You saw them give them all at game 3. It was incredibly compelling. They fall short in game 3. They are able to come back in game 4. You see the Liberty, they at Liberty are able to get over the top on game 3 with that incredible buzzer beater. You see them not be able to hold off the Lynx in game 4. I just wanted a close game in game 5. That's what I kept telling people. I was saying, it does kind of feel like over this 5-game series, the luck tips towards the host, towards the higher seed. I just want the Lynx to show up in Brooklyn and give the Liberty hell, win or lose. That's what I wanted out of this game. I said, I just want it to be close. And it was very close. It was very competitive. It was a game that comes down to fine margins. It went into overtime. It was the first WNBA finals to ever have 2 games go into overtime. As people recall, game 1 went into an overtime period, as did game 5. But it was not exactly what I thought I wanted, but it was not exactly what I wanted, because the game itself was a little bit ugly. It was a little bit of a slog. It was not very good. A number of players really struggled, particularly even on the Liberty side. But then again, that depth and quality of what they have compiled in that locker room won out. I'm just going to hit some of the major headlines that I'm sure everyone has already seen. Sabrina Ionescu went 1 for 19 in her field goal attempts. She went 1 from 10 from the three-point arc. The Liberty as a team only went 2 for 23 from behind the arc. They were in danger, and they say danger, they're like, ooh, it's scary, of becoming the first WNBA champion to not make a single three in the deciding finals game. Brianna Stewart kind of struggled in the clutch again. She missed 2 straight free throws with seconds left in the game before actually coming back and making 2. So she had an up and down game. She also very much struggled on the offensive end. However, if an overtime game ends 67-62, think about that for a second. Neither team, the offensive firepower is not hitting. This was a defensive grind of a game. These players were tired. They are good at defense, and they were good at disrupting each other. It was just a matter of who could pull out the win at the very, very end. I think that we still struggle, and I hold myself in this as well, as someone who is relatively new to kind of analyzing some of these basketball games, to kind of quantify what a truly great defense is and what that does to a series like this. For every struggle that you see on the offensive end, there is a defender who is doing their job. And it's a lot easier to say, Ionescu struggled and Stewart struggled. But you also have to say, for every Liberty player that was having trouble, there was a Lynx player who was doing their job. And I think that is what we saw in this game, until maybe the end, where it just felt like it was just, all guts, all glory. Minnesota were the second best defensive team in the league this year, only behind Connecticut, who they had to get through to even make it to the finals. You saw what the Lynx were doing at the beginning of this game. They do build a lead. They were tipping balls. They were cutting off passing lanes. They were getting their finger on these shots. A couple of times, someone was actually talking about how it looked like there were air balls, but there are certainly some air balls in the WNBA. But more often than not, if you see the arc of the ball affected like that, it's because someone got a finger on it. And even on the offensive end, if things weren't only working for them, for Minnesota, you always felt like, okay, that possession didn't work. There was a turnover there, but then you're like, oh, we'll just get back to work on defense, and nothing is guaranteed. So what were the margins in this game, right? It ends up being a 5-point win, but again, it was tied at the end of regulation. What does go into, if both teams are playing good defense, both teams are kind of struggling. I mean, it's not like Minnesota was lighting it up from behind the arc either. And that, again, is a testament to what the Liberty were doing on defense. Here are some of the things that I saw that I think made some of the differences here. And we'll talk about the very end of regulation as well. But throughout this game, here are the things that I think had a major impact. Alana Smith, a Minnesota center, I talked about her last week when we were talking about game 3. She retweaked her back. It was a very physical game. She was posted up against Jonquel Jones, who went on to win WNBA Finals MVP. Very physical back and forth matchup. Alana Smith, multiple times, she goes down, she hits the court, and you can tell she's in immense pain because she's been dealing with a back injury. And as people know, with back injuries, it's not something where you can just kind of ice it and fix it. It's all about pain management. She was incredibly uncomfortable. And despite this, she plays 36 minutes out of an available 45. So Minnesota's starting center was in pain for the entirety of this game, and she still played most of the game. This is a notable change. In game 3, when Alana Smith had to leave the game due to that back injury, Maisha Hines-Allen came in. And again, we talked about this last week. Hines-Allen really struggled against the Liberty. You saw kind of the plus minuses there. The Lynx were not able to pull from their bench in that same way. What Cheryl Reeve decides to do in this game is not actually play Hines-Allen at all. She did a rotation of a couple other players. And then she also kept Alana Smith in the game. And I understand that. A player that wants to empty the tank. Hopefully this doesn't have any repercussions in the future for Smith, but that impacted the game, again, in a physical game. In another physical game, Sandy Brondello, who I do not think had a perfect game 5. I do think that you are always going to see one coach kind of maybe make a gut call when it comes to fouling versus not fouling in a close game. It was really incredible, honestly, how New York was able to get back into a tie game at the end of regulation with the way that they handled fouling versus not fouling when they were down by 2. But she also made a switch in the second half of this game that I think, if you're looking, again, the broad strokes of how New York won this, and not necessarily how the Lynx lost it. It was the decision to put together a 5-player, set on the court that they had not really used in the past before. They decided to go big. They decided to really lean into that length advantage that they already had over the Lynx. It was a previously unused lineup of Ionescu, Jonquel Jones, Brianna Stewart, Leonie, and Nyara Sabally, who I think is a name that I'm sure everyone heard out of Sunday night as well. She scores 13 points off the bench, and she actually becomes the most functional player to help Ionescu have an impact on the game despite shooting so poorly, which they played a pick and roll together really nicely. So at the very least, if Ionescu was not hitting those shots, I think she got 7 assists on the night. You saw that pick and roll really work with Nyara Sabally. A moment on Sabally. She is a player who played very well for Oregon, and that powerhouse Oregon team that kind of no longer exists, right? The Oregon as a program has really fallen off since losing some of those players. So her sister Satu also played on that Oregon team. Sabrina Ionescu also played on that Oregon team. Nyara is one of who has the potential to be all-star level, but she has injury concerns. She was injured when she was drafted by New York. She has had her availability affected off and on her entire WNBA career. She wasn't available starting at the beginning of this season. She comes back from the Olympics feeling better, but you just see the quality that she has, and so you think, why is a player like that sitting on the bench? How did New York pull that off? That's why. It's because she is a very, very good player who isn't always available, but man, she was available at the right time, and she looked really, really sharp. The other thing that happens in this game, and I have a curiosity about that, I'm talking about injuries a lot because I just didn't think they were covered on the broadcast very much. They didn't really talk about at halftime. They weren't talking about Smith's availability and what that did to the Lynx's rotation. The fact that Courtney Vandersloot only plays 3 minutes in this game, maybe it's because Brondello was just going with the hot hand of Sabally and just wanting to really lean into length. But I also wonder, Sloot is another player who has had off and on like back issues throughout this season. If something happened there, maybe you have a tweak to your backup point guard and you have to make a shift. She had been playing so well in this series and in this postseason that I don't necessarily believe that was just a tactical tweak by Sandy Brondello, but sometimes those situations pull you into something that really works. And then the other thing, I think I mentioned Ionescu kind of finding someone like Sabally on the pick and roll, kind of working away at that Lynx defense, despite not shooting very well. You saw the same thing with Stewie and rebounds. Brianna Stewart was working so hard. She had 15 rebounds, 12 of which were defensive rebounds in this game, and she had 3 blocks. So she was understanding. I think I talked about this with Asia Wilson in the past, where these really good players who, even if they're having an off shooting night, they focus in on a different stat, right? For Ionescu, it was assists. For Stewart, it was rebounds. And they say, okay, I'm not hitting. I'm going to keep shooting because you're not going to win a game by not shooting. We talked about the usage issues in the past, but what else can I do? How else can I impact this game? And I think you have to look at Stewart's rebounds as a huge part of that. There was one sequence where she got like 2-3 offensive rebounds in a row. And again, it was because the shots weren't hitting, but that effort makes a difference in a game this close. And you saw that again with Ionescu, like I said, finding other players who were doing a good job of getting inside. Minnesota had trouble generating their turnovers into offense. They did not have an amazing offensive game. They went 3 from 19 behind the arc. They shot 37% overall, which their overall shooting percentage was better than New York's, but it's like faint praise, right? Because it just wasn't a great shooting night for both teams. They're having trouble with New York's length in the second half, so that further compacts what they're able to do. But, and I'm not going to shy away from this, right? They also didn't get the calls. So when you talk about winning or losing a game, it all happens throughout the course of an entire game, right? And as we know in basketball, a missed call or a bad call, if it's made in the first quarter, doesn't matter as much if it's made in the fourth quarter. I think in soccer, we always say, if someone doesn't call a penalty, you say, well, that would have been a foul in the middle of the pitch. Those moments do impact the way things are called, and whether someone has a heavy hand or a light hand. The Lynx are up by 2 at the very end of this game. The physicality kind of favored New York in Game 5 after arguably going the other way in Game 4. The Lynx actually tied this series up on a set of free throws, so the disparity does happen kind of throughout this series. The one play that people are focusing on the most is the final possession for New York, which tied the game on 2 free throws, in which, if you look at the video, it appears that Brianna Stewart is allowed to travel on the final play, possibly actually twice. She gets a whole separate stutter step in. It kind of feels like, to the fan, again, the way it feels last night is that Brianna Stewart was going to be allowed to grab the ball, kind of do whatever, and then get a foul. Sandy Brondello was caught on the stream, actually on the broadcast, telling her players to embellish in that moment. Now, I don't blame Brondello for that. You got to do what you got to do to win. It was also kind of a soft contact call on Alana Smith there. At the end, it was a shooting foul. Again, that gave Stewart the ability to tie it up. I'm going to go against the grain here and say that while it was soft, it was a foul. It was a soft foul. Stewart was absolutely allowed to travel. I think you can make the argument, and other people have, that you can't make that call, right? You have to let the play happen through contact, especially when it had been a lot of contact throughout the game. But by the letter of the law, that was a foul. Photos are a little bit deceptive because they show Smith getting all ball, and that's true. She does get all ball, but before that, she does get Stewart's hand. And you can see on Getty, I mean, this is actually Nafisa Collier put this on her Instagram this morning. There was a pretty bad, flagrant foul that Kayla Thornton committed against Collier. It was called a common foul, but I think if that had been reviewed, they would have seen the obvious hands to the face. Collier did not shoot any free throws in this game. There was a high disparity of free throws for New York versus Minnesota. Kayla Thornton was an incredible spark off the bench, but I think the flip side of that is you could say that she was allowed to play the game very, very physically, and that was allowed to kind of pull someone Collier off her game. But then also all of this happens and it's still tied, and Minnesota still has a chance to win a championship in overtime, and they just couldn't get the shots to land. They get outshot 7-2 in overtime, and that's ball game. So my whole point, and I think people who listen to this show know that this is my classic thing, which is that all of these things happened at once. And that's the beautiful thing about sports, is that you look at all the tactical tweets that New York made, or the fact that Sabally played so well, or the fact that their stars found other ways to impact the game. You saw how good the defense was, but also, frankly, Minnesota did not get the calls at the end of the game to win. And I think all of that can be true at the same time. To maybe further that point, I'm gonna let Cheryl Reeve take the mic here for a second. So Cheryl Reeve was pretty hot after this game. She was sticking up for her players. She was pretty upset about the officiating at the end of the game and throughout the game. The Lynx had a very bad third quarter offensively, and their counterpoint was, again, that was that moment where Thornton got her hands in Nafisa Collier's face. This idea that how are you supposed to play offense if the other team is allowed to foul you? And so what Reeve says, she says, it doesn't feel right that you lose a series with that level of discrepancy. We don't have a team that whines and complains about all that stuff. Sometimes it probably hurts us, maybe a little more. I don't know. Something. But you have a star player like Fee that just, I don't get it. I don't get how she can be held and go to the basket and get hit. And then a marginal, at best, sends their best player to the free throw line. I mean, that's tough. It's tough to swallow. End quote. Like I said, call your shot. No free throws on Sunday. I think it's a fair complaint, but I also think all that other stuff happened in this game. And then Reeve also said, and I think that this is what she's going to be repeating to herself for the entire offseason until she gets a chance to play another game. Reeve says these guys shot 30%, and the difference was in the foul line. And that's true. I am of the opinion that free throw discrepancy doesn't always mean that it wasn't officiated well. Sometimes one team simply fouls more. I actually do think that a lot of the times that the Liberty went to the free throw line, those were fouls. I think what you have to look for is on the other end is why we're Minnesota maybe not getting those same requisite calls. But yeah, I go back and forth on free throw discrepancy, because I think you can look at the numbers and say, well, that's not fair. One team got way more free throws than the other, but it's well, you have to watch the game and see what led to that. But I do believe that Minnesota could have had more free throws called. But all these little things add up. They all add up. So I don't know. I think, again, Minnesota played an incredible defensive game, but you have to play an incredible defensive game and then also get the shots to land on the other end. And that's kind of how this game went. So maybe some big picture stuff here. We're going a little bit long on this, but I think it's worthwhile. This is the end of an incredibly monumental, impactful WNBA season that I think is going to be talked about for years to come as a turning of the corner, again, in this modern era of the league, in terms of the star power and the ratings and the parity and the TV deal that they got done that is going to impact the league's finances for the upcoming decade. The fact that they're possibly going to be, not really possibly, I think almost surely going to be reopening the collective bargaining agreement going forward. There's going to be expansion going forward. This is the beginning of something league changing. The league is never going back to what it was before this year. So maybe it's fitting that this final series that we got after all of that was this super team where everyone was talking about the team that's compiled through free agency, and the super blank team, this team that was put together of maybe people who were a little bit overlooked and maybe individually can't go toe to toe with a team like New York, but as a team, they look more cohesive and like they are on the same page than New York did, because they disrupted New York. They made New York look like a team of stars that did not practice together. And that is an achievement in and of itself. And the Lynx should be very, very proud. But sometimes championships are won in a general manager's office, right? Sometimes they're won on a coach's clipboard, but sometimes they're not. You look at Jonquel Jones, she wins finals MVP, averaging 17.8 points and 7.6 rebounds in the entire 5-game WNBA finals. That is a player that the Liberty went out and got in free agency, and she took the deal to go play in New York because she wanted to be in this larger market, more investment. The Tsai family has been pouring a ton of money into this team to get this championship. She wants to play with Brianna Stewart and Sabrina Ionescu and Courtney Vandersloot. You look at that, you say, yeah, that consistent presence is probably what had the greatest impact over 5 games of the New York Liberty winning this, because I do think if it had gone the other way, we know exactly who finals MVP would have been, and it would have been Nafisa Collier, who had a historically good postseason this year. But also, New York did this in pieces, right? And it took the whole team. Jones was massive. I say Courtney Vandersloot didn't play much in this game, but what she added to the semifinal series against the Aces and the final series was very important coming off of the bench. But you look at the other pieces that they found, right? Nayara Sabally is a player that they drafted. Sabrina Ionescu is a player that they drafted. Leonie Fibic is a player that they went and found. She was kind of that underrated gem kind of a player that other teams didn't want to sign. You look at the way that Nyjah Hamilton impacted this series despite being limited due to the knee surgery that she had earlier in this season. It's not just the big signings, but the big signings help. And that was the other kind of big takeaway after this game, because as you know, in American sports, we hand the trophy to the owner. But people were talking about the investment, right? They were talking about pushing forward on charter flights, or even Reeve on the other, like Reeve kind of accused the Liberty of cap circumvention that has gone unnoticed or has been allowed. But it all kind of gets thrown into this cauldron of competition that makes a league like the WNBA great. And you cannot just buy a ring. That was very obvious last year. And again, if you look at who made an impact on this particular game, it takes more than just the free agents, but the free agents help. I also think the way Minnesota built their team is sustainable. I think that people want to go play for Minnesota because their culture of good basketball. Yeah, maybe they're not New York. Maybe they don't have all the bells and whistles, but I actually think that Lynx ownership has done a very nice job of keeping their stars very happy. And you go if you're a real basketball head because you want to go play for that team and play with those players, and you know that you're there going to be free agents calling Cheryl Reeve up saying, please, I want to go play with Nafisa Collier next year. And you know what Cheryl Reeve is going to say? She's going to say, well, you better fit my offense, otherwise it's not happening. So the way Minnesota has done this is sustainable as well. And I think it's also fairly obvious, speaking of Cheryl Reeve, that coaching is going to be a major differentiator going forward. I think that's maybe the one thing that I'm really looking at. You're going to see players move. We're going to see one-year contracts because of the CBA situation. You're not going to see players doing long extensions or anything like that. You're going to see 1 years. You're going to see movement. The league is going to look very different next year. But you're also seeing a lot of teams be very quick to cut loose their coaching situations. We saw Dallas do it this week after a number of other teams did it over the last couple of weeks. You saw it in these semifinals, right, where you've got Stephanie White and Sandy Brondello and Becky Hammond and Cheryl Reeve, these good coaches who know what they're doing and play teams that go out there and look like they have these coherent systems. And it's not like growing and learning, and you're not looking at individual players simply playing well. They play like teams. I think that is going to be the thing to watch, is going to be who are these other teams that are now, they have coaching vacancies. Who do they hire? What is that process? What do they promise those people? How do those people negotiate with their general managers? How do they talk to their players? And how do you find your niche in this new era of competition? Because I do think it's a good year going into next year to tinker with some projects, both successful, like the Aces and the Sun. I think we're going to see changes for them despite some very successful years, and also less so. A team like Atlanta or a team like Dallas or, Chicago kind of has the young core, but what are they doing to push past that? How do they become a playoff team again? Washington, LA, these teams, what are they going to do to take that next step? And I'm just glad that we got to enjoy some really good playoff hoops before it was all done. And I think the Lynx should walk away from this series pissed. And I think the Liberty should walk away from this series proud. And I think we should all take a nice break before doing it again next year, because we're going to have an expanded league. We're going to have more talent pouring in on the college draft. And it's going to be just another fabulous season of basketball. So real quick, went super long on basketball, but I do just want to take a couple notes on the NWSL weekend. It's the second to last weekend of NWSL play. First, before the international break, there's only going to be one more match weekend left. Not much movement in the table. We still are kind of looking at these same scenarios where Portland, Bay, and Louisville can clinch playoffs, or they can be eliminated. Only 2 spots left for those 3 teams. You're seeing kind of that 2 through 4 not really move too much after locking up home quarterfinals. We're kind of in this nebulous era, but also kind of an end of an era. Talk about, I did the big wrap-up stuff for WNBA, but we're seeing a lot of players say goodbye in the NWSL this season. I think that's worth noting as well. We saw Gotham salute Kelly O'Hara on Sunday. Kansas City honored Desiree Scott, who announced she's going to be retiring. Angel City City paid tribute to Merritt Mathias. I believe Portland is going to do the same at the beginning of November for Christine Sinclair. We've already seen it for Alex Morgan. We saw Sinead Farrelly retire earlier this year. Just a huge passing of the torch moment for the NWSL. They also have a new CBA. We're also moving into, again, a new era of expansion of these clubs with their ownership changes. We're seeing massive ownership changes in these NWSL clubs. And we're seeing players who maybe their bodies tell them that it's time or their brains tell them that it's time, and they're stepping away from the game. Just really moving in many ways to see these players be honored, to have them feel secure in their decision to walk away. And I'm just kind of excited to see what happens next, because it just feels like just always happens at the end of a large international cycle, end of a World Cup or an Olympic Games. But I just want to say salute to all of those players. And what a strange sensation to tune into all of these different games to see these teams saying goodbye. And then the other thing I just want to shout out is Temwa Chawinga. I keep saying Chawinga or Banda. I think at this point, I got to say, I'm on the Temi train. I'm on the Temwa Chawinga train for MVP. She continued one of the best individual runs in NWSL history this weekend, finding the back of the net for the 20th time this regular season, already set a single season record, but she's the first NWSL player to ever score 20 goals in a single season. This is something, if anybody has been following my work, this is something I've been dreaming of for like 5 years. 20 goals, 2. I want a 2 in front of that number. She has now scored against every other team in the league. So she has scored against all other 13 teams in the NWSL. She's the first player to ever do it with that number. I think maybe she should score an own goal, and then she'll have scored on everybody. But I think Temwa Chawinga, with everything that she's doing, nothing against Barbara Banda, but you did see Orlando, who lost again this weekend, pull up after that Shield win, and Chawinga is building that momentum. And that is actually maybe my final thought. Going into this international break, I have a couple things I want to ponder, right? Which of Louisville and Bay are going to get the final spot? I do think Portland's going to ultimately get this done by the skin of their teeth. Both Louisville and Bay win this weekend. They are not giving up. Love the fight, and I can't wait to see who gets that final spot. Whether Orlando's form improves. Did they lose too late? Did Orlando lose too late? We saw Kansas City do this. They had a little bit of a skid, and now they're back on upward momentum, doing very well. Orlando now has lost 2 in a row. You got to get back. You got to win that final game to get the momentum going for playoffs. Did they lose too late to overcome some of that sort of the emotions that come with the Shield win, losing a game? How do you right the ship? Can Banda leave a final impression on the minds of MVP voters after Chawinga just keeps pushing and pushing and pushing? What positives can teams that are floundering leave for their fans? Again, monumental offseason with a new CBA. These teams need to prove to these players that they've got something that these players want to buy into, because there has been a very low floor for some of these teams in 2024. And then also just how clinched teams handle final rotations. Teams are not in perfect health right now. You've got Kansas City and Gotham, who have a ton of momentum. You've got Orlando, who needs to kind of right the ship again, going back into the postseason. You've got Washington that have to figure out kind of the problem solving because they don't have everybody available all the time. North Carolina and Chicago really need to boost some confidence after some kind of middling end to the regular season. There's a lot to dig into there. So I think it's going to be a very, very good NWSL finale, if maybe slightly less dramatic than last year, because last year was like all the drama in once. But I'm excited to get into this international break, dig into what happens with the U.S. Women's National Team and beyond, before really turning our focus to the NWSL postseason. So this has been today's edition of The Late Sub. I am your host, Claire Watkins. Shout out producer extraordinaire Parker Fenton. We're going to delay recording later this week slightly so that we can catch the next U.S. Women's National Team game, which is going to be played on Thursday night. Very excited to go long on that. I love analyzing the U.S. There's always so much there to dig into. I hope everyone has and enjoys the WNBA coverage on this show this year, because it never stops. There's a lot of off-season stuff to dig into, but as the season goes, so do we. Thanks y'all for listening.